Welcome to your daily news brief and deep dive into the source material. Usually when you think about a border, you picture a line on a map, a fence.
Right, something solid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Something engineered and exact. You are either standing inside the line or you're outside of it. It's totally binary.
It's supposed to be clean, but when you look closely at the mechanics of how the world actually operates, those solid lines start to look a lot more like suggestions.
Which is exactly what happens when you read through the stack of global headlines from the past couple of days, July 14th and 15th, 2026.
Yeah, the geopolitical and domestic landscape we're looking at is pretty murky right now.
It is. So today our mission is to cut through the absolute chaos of this specific news cycle and, well, find the overarching theme hiding inside these sources.
Because right now, India is navigating these immense, multifaceted pressures.
We're looking at global shockwaves, intense domestic debates about historical identity, and a digital landscape where free speech is colliding with biometric regulation.
And while these events might seem totally disconnected to you, ranging from U.S. sanctions in the Middle East to court battles in Madhya Pradesh, all the way to a cricket match in Birmingham, they actually all paint a singular picture of the world you're living in right now.
Right. India is actively renegotiating its boundaries, both the physical ones and the invisible ones.
Let's start with the most immediate global crisis, though, the one that impacts your wallet, your commute, your daily life.
Energy and the economy. We often use metaphors about cargo ships navigating stormy seas to describe the economy. But right now, I think a better way to look at India's economy is like a tenant whose rent is inexplicably tied to the global stock market.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, no matter how well you budget at home, your survival is dictated by chaotic forces entirely out of your control. And right now, the market is crashing because there is a massive storm in the Strait of Hormuz.
A literal storm of munitions. On July 14th, the U.S. military launched a new round of strikes specifically designed to degrade Iranian capabilities in the strait.
And this happened just hours before a renewed U.S. naval blockade on Iranian ports officially took effect.
Which, completely shattered the truce that Pakistan had recently managed to broker.
Right.
The collapse of that truce is the catalyst for everything we're seeing in the markets today. The situation escalated instantly.
We're seeing Yemen's Houthi rebels claiming drone strikes in response, right?
Exactly. Bahrain is actively repelling aerial attacks, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is warning Iran of decisive retaliation. The entire region is bracing for a wider conflict.
And here is where our tenant feels the rent increase. Brent crude just surged to $86.42 a barrel.
That's a huge jump.
It is. And because India buys over 85% of its crude oil in U.S. dollars, we're getting hit from two sides simultaneously. The rupee has slid 62 paise to 96.30 against the dollar.
That dual impact mechanism is so crucial to understand. When a conflict like this breaks out, global supply chains panic.
Right, causing the price of crude oil to spike.
Exactly. And simultaneously, global investors look for a safe haven for their money, which historically is the U.S. dollar. So the dollar strengthens while the crude gets more expensive.
Meaning India's import bill skyrockets almost overnight.
Yes, which explains the terrifying data point in our sources. Wholesale inflation has just hit 9.87%.
Nearly 10%?
Yeah, that is the literal mechanism of how a drone strike thousands of miles away translates into the price of a tomato in Mumbai.
But the situation is even more complicated, because at the exact same time, U.S. senators just unveiled a revised version of a Russia sanctions bill.
This is the bill originally championed by the late Senator Lindsey Graham. What's fascinating here is how the Senate actually had to walk back the severity of their own legislation to, well, face geopolitical reality.
Because originally the bill threatened a blanket 500% tariff on countries buying Russian oil and gas.
Right. A 500% tariff would essentially be an economic death sentence for any developing nation relying on that energy.
Precisely. Which is why the revised bill caps the penalty at a 100% tariff and only targets the top 5 buyers.
A list that prominently includes India and China.
But I noticed a massive caveat in the text of the bill. President Donald Trump has the authority to issue a waiver if he determines it's in the U.S. national interest.
Yes, the waiver clause.
So I have to ask, if we rely so heavily on imported oil to keep the lights on and keep inflation from exploding into double digits, aren't these U.S. sanctions basically catching India in an unavoidable crossfire between Washington and Moscow? I mean, why include a waiver at all?
Well, the waiver exists because Washington needs India just as much as India needs affordable oil. That is the defining geopolitical tightrope of our time.
Right.
India is trying to secure discounted energy from Russia to feed a massive growing economy. But at the same time, India is managing a deep strategic partnership with the United States that is actively blockading Iran and trying to choke Russia's economy.
Because the U.S. desperately needs India as a counterweight to China in the Indo-Pacific region.
Exactly. That's why the 500% tariff was never going to fly.
They can't afford to alienate New Delhi completely.
No, they can't. But the 100% cap, even with the possibility of a presidential waiver, it still acts as a heavy lever. It hangs over the relationship, constantly reminding India that its energy security is vulnerable to American legislative whims.
So, if the multilateral global system feels like a trap, where India is just reacting to other superpowers, how is India proactively trying to shape those rules?
Well, we can see that strategy playing out right now at the UN headquarters. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar just formally launched India's campaign for a non-permanent seat on the UN Security Council.
This is for the 2028-29 term, right?
Yes, competing against Tajikistan for the Asia-Pacific Group seat. And he outlined an approach called Shanti, an acronym for securing holistic advancement through norms, trust, integrity.
The core argument of the Shanti campaign is foundational reform, from what I understand.
It is. Jaishankar is pointing out that the UN Security Council, which was created in 1945, simply does not reflect the geopolitical realities of the 21st century.
Because it's still dominated by the same 5 permanent members who hold all the veto power.
Exactly.
I'm going to be a little cynical here, though. We hear about the need for UN Security Council reform constantly. India has been making this argument for decades. Is a campaign for a 2-year non-permanent seat actually going to threaten the monopoly of the permanent 5, the U.S., UK, France, Russia, and China? Or is this just, necessary diplomatic theater?
I mean, your cynicism is entirely warranted. Changing the permanent structure of the UN is agonizingly slow, by design.
Yeah.
The P5 actors use a procedural tactic where nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. They can stall any reform that dilutes their veto power indefinitely. So taking a non-permanent seat doesn't really change the architecture of the building.
Just gives you a temporary microphone.
Right. But you have to view the UN campaign not in isolation, but in tandem with India's bilateral moves. If the UN is the slow, frustrating game of securing the Global South's voice on paper, bilateral trade is where India is actually bypassing the gridlock.
Flexing its modern economic muscle today. And the UK deal is the perfect example of that. This is where the structural changes are actually happening. On July 15th, the India-UK Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, and the Double Contribution Convention, DCC, officially came into force.
Described by the Commerce Secretary as a gold standard agreement. And the mechanics of this deal are incredibly revealing about India's current negotiating power.
The scope is massive. The UK is immediately eliminating tariffs on 96.8% of its tariff lines.
Which covers almost 98% of the total trade value.
Yeah. And what stands out to me is how India managed to protect its sensitive sectors, specifically dairy and agriculture, while still opening up vast new avenues for its service and manufacturing sectors.
That targeted protection is a huge win, but the DCC, the Double Contribution Convention, is perhaps the most immediate structural human victory in this entire package.
Oh, so?
Well, to understand why, you have to look at the previous labor dynamic.
Sure.
Historically, Indian professionals working in the UK had to sink about 25% of their salaries into the UK's national insurance system.
Wow. And because they were usually on temporary visas, they would return to India long before they could ever claim a pension or utilize those social benefits.
Right, it was a massive sunk cost, a permanent tax on temporary labor.
Oh, that's brutal.
Exactly. And now, this new convention prevents that double Social Security contribution for 5 years. That legally restructures the financial reality for 75,000 Indian workers.
Saving them a massive chunk of their hard-earned paychecks.
Yes. So when we contrast the UN gridlock with the UK Trade Pact, it shows a nation that is tired of waiting for the old 1945 borders of power to open up.
And is simply redrawing its own trade lines with London on its own terms.
It's a profound shift in legal and economic confidence on the world stage.
But that intense focus on legal standing internationally bleeds right into our domestic reality. How is India defining its internal identity? Because looking at the sources from July 14th and 15th, bureaucratic documents and ancient archaeological sites have suddenly become the front lines of a massive debate about who belongs.
The tension around bureaucratic documents is particularly fascinating. The Ministry of External Affairs recently had to issue a formal clarification regarding passports.
Right.
They stated explicitly that an Indian passport is not a standalone proof of citizenship.
Which is wild. This all started because an official made an offhand comment referring to the passport as merely a travel document.
Yeah, and the public reaction was explosive. It forced the MEA to clarify that legally, under the Passports Act of 1967, the document is specifically and solely meant to regulate the departure of citizens from India.
And we have to contextualize this with the statistics because less than 8% of the Indian population even holds a passport,
Right.
which is just crazy to think about. If a passport is essentially just a permission slip to leave the country, and less than 8% of the population even has one, why did a mundane bureaucratic clarification trigger such a fiery national debate about the definition of an Indian citizen?
Because we are living in an era of intense demographic anxiety and historical reflection. When the very concept of belonging feels like it is under a microscope, a passport ceases to be just a booklet of paper,
It becomes a symbol.
a heavy emotional symbol of rights and validation. People are hyper-aware of how the state legally recognizes their identity. When the government says your highest-tier travel document doesn't definitively prove your citizenship, it introduces a terrifying legal ambiguity for the average person.
And that ambiguity about who owns the narrative of the past is playing out physically, too. We are seeing this exact same tension over shared historical spaces in the courts right now, specifically regarding the Boshala complex in Madhya Pradesh.
Right. The Supreme Court just had to step into a highly sensitive, centuries-old dispute over this site. For context, this is a complex that has deeply rooted claims from both the Hindu and Muslim communities.
Yeah, to understand the gravity of the Supreme Court's intervention, we need to lay out the competing claims exactly as they're presented in the sources. Recently, a high court ruling declared the complex to be a Saraswati temple built by the scholar King Raja Bhoj. This ruling was backed by a massive archaeological survey of India report exceeding 2,000 pages, which concluded that a large structure from the Parmar king's era predated the mosque.
Right.
The ASI report noted that the current complex incorporated repurposed temple components, including coins and structural sculptures.
And on the other side of the dispute, the Muslim community argues that the complex has historically functioned as the Kamal Mala Mosque. They are actively contesting the cancellation of a 2003 arrangement that allowed Friday namaz inside the complex.
Okay.
Furthermore, they've argued in court that the recent ASI report is biased and was specifically crafted to support the Hindu claims.
So with these incredibly polarized narratives colliding, how did the Supreme Court actually rule? What are the mechanics of their intervention here?
Well, the Supreme Court's ruling is essentially a highly calculated pause button designed to prevent immediate conflict. They refused to issue an interim order that would fully restore Friday namaz inside the main complex. However, acknowledging the need for the Muslim community to pray, they ordered the Madhya Pradesh government to provide an adjacent open space specifically for Friday prayers between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m.
So they are mandating physical space and specific time frames to maintain the peace.
Yes. And crucially, they ordered the ASI to halt any structural changes to the site. Nothing can be altered without explicit prior permission from the Supreme Court. They are freezing the physical state of the complex.
It is striking. You look at the passport debate, a fight over the legal text of identity, and the Boshala dispute, a fight over the physical architecture of history. And you see a nation deeply, anxiously engaged in negotiating the boundaries of its own cultural reality.
Which naturally brings us to the boundaries of the public voice. If the physical and historical borders are contested, how are Indian citizens expressing their dissent in this climate?
And more importantly, what are the consequences when you cross the invisible line of acceptable speech?
Exactly. We have two incredibly contrasting examples from today's sources. One is taking place on the physical streets, and the other in the digital sphere.
Let's start on the streets of Delhi at Jantar Mantar. Climate activist Sonam Wangchuk is currently on day 17 of an indefinite hunger strike, demanding the resignation of the union education minister.
And the physical reality of this protest is severe. Wangchuk has lost 8.5 kilograms, and the reports detail significant muscle loss and severe pain.
And the public outcry supporting him is massive. Over 1,800 academics and writers have signed petitions. You have prominent figures across society, writers like Arundhati Roy, actors like Nazaruddin Shah and Omi Vaidya, and politicians like Akhilesh Yadav and Mamata Banerjee, all publicly pleading with him to end the fast.
But he absolutely refuses.
He does.
What Wang Chuk is doing is a raw, deeply historical form of democratic protest. He's utilizing the traditional mechanism of self-sacrifice, putting his own physical body on the line to force a moral dialogue with the state.
But then, you contrast that solemn physical sacrifice with the reality of modern speech in the digital sphere. The online world is monetized, rapid, and currently facing severe legal blowback.
It is a completely different paradigm of expression. For example, a BJP cybercell chief in Nagpur just filed a massive defamation case against multiple YouTubers and influencers, including prominent creator Manish Kashyap.
The mechanics of this case are fascinating.
Mm.
The accusation is that these influencers were spreading active misinformation by claiming that ethanol-blended petrol ruins car engines.
And doing so while using abusive language toward Union Minister Nitin Gadkari.
Right. The police have registered the case citing defamation, intentional insult, and the distribution of obscene electronic content, specifically targeting videos with clickbait titles complaining about vehicles rusting and breaking down due to the government's ethanol policies.
So you have political and corporate policies being attacked online, resulting in criminal defamation cases.
But it isn't just political speech facing a crackdown. The Supreme Court itself is laying down incredibly heavy guardrails on online humor and creator culture.
Yes, the Supreme Court recently took unprecedented action against comedians Samir Raina and 4 other influencers, finding them 3 lakh each.
And the court explicitly threatened to raise that fine to 30 lakh if they don't comply.
Which is a massive fine.
Yeah, why? Because these creators failed to comply with a previous court order demanding they use their massive platforms to raise awareness for spinal muscular atrophy.
The context here is that they had previously mocked disabilities on an online show.
Oh, okay.
The Chief Justice was uncompromising in his reasoning. He explicitly stated that creators cannot use the shield of free speech to violate human dignity, especially for monetized commercial gain.
I mean, I understand the moral argument there. Mocking disabilities for YouTube ad revenue is abhorrent. But the court went further, didn't they?
They did. They observed that existing IT laws are poorly implemented, and they suggested something radical regarding how we access the internet.
This is where the legal architecture of the internet could change overnight. The court suggested the implementation of stronger age verification and Aadhaar-based gating before explicit or sensitive content becomes viewable online.
Yeah.
Stop right there. Let's unpack the mechanics of Aadhaar-based gating. We are talking about a system where, before you can click play on a YouTube video that the government or an algorithm deems sensitive, you have to verify your identity using your national biometric ID.
Your retinas or your fingerprints tied directly to your viewing habits.
Right. So is this a necessary guardrail to protect human dignity online? Or is it a dystopian slide toward total internet censorship?
That tension is the defining digital debate of the decade.
Truly.
The government and the courts are struggling with a profound technological reality. How do you regulate modern speech that travels at the speed of light speech that can ruin reputations or violate human dignity instantly without crushing the democratic right to dissent or remain anonymous?
Because Wang Chuk's physical protest is easy to categorize. It is a traditional, localized stand.
Exactly, but the YouTubers, the comedians, the influencers, they represent the digital Wild West. The boundaries of what is acceptable haven't been fully mapped out yet.
And the Supreme Court is essentially sending a warning. If the platforms won't map the boundaries of dignity, the state will, and we might use your biometric identity to enforce those borders.
It completely eliminates the concept of digital anonymity.
It is a staggering amount of pressure on the system. I mean, we're looking at a nation juggling geopolitical crossfire in Hormuz, inflation, intense religious disputes over ancient temples, citizens starving themselves for educational reform, and the highest court in the land threatening to tie your biometric data to your YouTube account.
It's heavy.
We need a palate cleanser. And thankfully, today's sources provided one from Birmingham.
A rare unifying moment of national relief.
India secured a much-needed victory in the first ODI cricket match against England, finally breaking a miserable 6-game losing streak across formats.
And the relief was palpable, especially because the victory did not follow the expected script. The traditional pillars of the team failed entirely.
They really did. The senior trio of Rohit Sharma, Virat Kohli, and KL Rahul scored a combined 17 runs.
Ouch.
Yeah, and on the other side, Joe Root was anchoring England with his 4th successive 50-plus score. If you were watching that first innings, the anxiety was overwhelming. It felt like another inevitable collapse.
But the narrative was entirely flipped by Axar Patel. He was playing his first ODI since Sydney last year, and he delivered a massive all-around performance that fundamentally changed the momentum.
He broke the century stand between Root and Liam Dawson. He cleaned up the tail end by taking 4 wickets, and then he walked out and top-scored in the chase with an unbeaten half-century alongside Washington Sundar.
It's easy to dismiss sports as a distraction, but when a population is collectively holding its breath over inflation, geopolitical tension, and domestic strife, a dramatic turnaround on the cricket pitch provides a crucial shared emotional release.
It grounds all of this heavy, abstract reality in something familiar and undeniably celebratory.
It reminds everyone of what it feels like to win together.
It really does. So let's zoom back out and wrap up what we've uncovered today. We started this deep dive by looking at boundaries.
Right.
And whether it is navigating the physical threats and blockades in the Strait of Hormuz, proactively redrawing trade boundaries with the UK to protect Indian labor, balancing the intensely debated historical spaces at the Boshala complex, or the Supreme Court drawing a strict biometric line in the sand for digital creators, India is actively, aggressively renegotiating its boundaries.
Which leaves us with a fascinating, almost contradictory reality to ponder.
How so?
As our physical boundaries become more fluid and interconnected, as global trade lines blur to the point where a missile in the Middle East instantly affects the wholesale inflation rate in Mumbai, our internal, social, and digital boundaries are becoming significantly more rigid and heavily policed.
Wow. And that leads to a final thought for you to mull over as you step away from this deep dive. As we move deeper into this decade, and the architecture of our daily lives becomes increasingly virtual, will the most fiercely guarded borders of the future be the ones drawn on physical maps between nations, or the biometric borders built around our digital identities and our right to speak?
The map is changing, and the lines are no longer just drawn in ink.
They are being written in code. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Keep questioning the headlines, keep looking for the connections, and we will see you next time.